Alarms do not sound for what happens next. That is the first wrong thing. I am watching the tracking board when 412 human signatures blink from green to nothing, between one breath and the next. Not red, not the color for destroyed. Just gone. Like someone reached into the display and pulled the pins out one at a time. Except it happens all at once. And there are 412 of them, and I am the only person on this deck who notices before the room starts shouting. My name is Claire Doyle. I run Signal Watch on Perimeter Station 9, out past the trade lanes, past the treaty line, past everything that anyone back home considers important. My job is boring on purpose. Boring means nothing is happening. Boring means the humans are still out there, quiet and predictable, doing whatever humans do in the dark corners of space they claimed for themselves. Boring ends at 0412 station time. I count again. 412. I count a third time because counting feels better than the alternative, which is standing up and telling my shift supervisor that the entire human presence in 3 sectors has disappeared, without a distress call, without a retreat order, without so much as a parting insult. Owen Price leans over my shoulder before I say a word. He smells like recycled coffee and older regret. Your board's glitching, he says. My board is not glitching. 400 ships don't just leave, Claire. They didn't leave. Leaving takes time. This took 41 minutes. He goes quiet in the specific way people go quiet when they've run out of comfortable explanations. I watch him do the math. 41 minutes to empty 3 sectors means every human vessel, from the smallest courier to the largest carrier, received the same order, at the same instant, and executed it without deviation. No stragglers. No last-second cargo runs. No one radioing home to say goodbye. I pull the audio logs. There is nothing on them. Not static, not code, not a compressed burst transmission hiding a message. Silence. Clean and total. The kind you only get when nobody was ever planning to say anything at all. Get Marcus, I say. Owen doesn't move. It's the middle of the night. It's always the middle of the night somewhere. Get him. Marcus Bell runs this station like a man who has spent his whole career waiting for something to finally justify the size of his office. He arrives in 11 minutes, hair uncombed, tunic buttoned wrong, and he looks at my board the way a man looks at a bill he was told would never come. He stares at the board for a long moment before he says anything else, and I watch him run through the same stages I already ran through 20 minutes earlier. Disbelief first, then the reflexive search for a technical explanation, then the slower, heavier realization that no technical explanation actually fits. Confirm it, he says. I have already confirmed it 4 times. I confirm it a 5th, because that is apparently what confirmation means to men like Marcus. The screen doesn't change. The ships are still gone. The silence is still total. Could be a coordinated retreat, he says. Some kind of internal crisis, political. No warning, I say. No evacuation broadcast. No distress beacon. You don't hide a political crisis from your own sensors, Marcus. You hide it from everyone else. This wasn't hidden from anyone. It just wasn't announced. There's a difference? There's a difference between running and leaving. He doesn't like that answer. I don't blame him. I don't like it either. Running implies fear, and fear is a shape we know how to fight. Leaving implies a decision, made calmly, somewhere far above my clearance, by people who did not feel the need to explain themselves to the rest of the galaxy on their way out the door. I pull up the archive out of habit, the way I always do when a pattern refuses to sit still in my head. 10 years of human comm traffic through this sector, logged, indexed, mostly ignored by anyone who isn't paid to care about the shape of someone else's silence. I am looking for precedent. I don't find one, not exactly, but I find something close to it. 3 smaller incidents scattered across the archive, each one a human outpost going dark for a few hours at a stretch, always following the same rough pattern. A dispute logged, a complaint filed, silence for a handful of hours, then traffic resuming, as if nothing happened at all. I flag the pattern and keep reading, and the deeper I go, the more it looks less like coincidence and more like a rehearsal. Small versions of last night's silence, run quietly over the years, each one a little longer than the last, each one closer to whatever finally triggered at 0412 this morning. Owen watches me work without saying much, which is unusual for him. He has the kind of face that makes silence look uncomfortable on him. like he's borrowing an expression that doesn't fit. You're building a theory, he says eventually. I'm building a timeline. Same thing, with better lighting. I don't argue with him. I keep pulling records instead, because somewhere in that timeline is the answer to a question that's been sitting in my chest since I first counted 412, which is not what happened, because I already know what happened. But why now, tonight, after however many smaller rehearsals came before it? You think this was building for years, Owen says. I think humans don't do anything without deciding to do it first, and I think whatever they decided a long time before last night. He doesn't have a response for that, and for once I don't blame him. Some conclusions don't leave much room for a comfortable follow-up question. By 0600 the other stations start calling in. Same story, different sectors. Human colonies along the buffer zone, human trade convoys in contested space, human diplomatic staff seconded to a dozen alliance committees, all of it withdrawn inside the same 41-minute window, synchronized across more than 100 light-years with a precision that should be physically impossible given the distances involved. I do the math twice because I don't trust myself the first time. 100 light-years, 41 minutes. Whatever coordinated that departure did not wait for a signal to travel the old way. It was already sitting there, armed and ready, waiting for one instruction to fire it. Every human outpost had that instruction loaded before I ever sat down at my board this shift. They just chose the moment. Nadia Foss runs analysis 2 decks down, and she is the only person on this station who scares easier than I do, which is why I trust her instincts. She meets me in the corridor holding a tablet like it might bite her. You saw the letter, she says. What letter? Cradle Fall Station. Somebody left a personal log open on a public terminal. Half a sentence. No signature. I pulled the metadata before command, locked the file. Timestamp matches the withdrawal window exactly. What does it say? She turns the tablet toward me. 10 words. Unfinished. The kind of sentence a person writes without knowing it's about to become the last thing they ever write in that room. I tell them I'll be home before mu. That's it. That's where it stops. Not because something happened to the person writing it, because the order came, and whatever it said, it mattered more than finishing a sentence to someone they loved. I don't sleep after that. I sit in the observation lounge and watch the empty places on the star chart where human presence used to be. Gaps now, clean-edged and precise, like someone erased them from the record with a steady hand instead of a shaking one. 3 sectors of silence. 100 worlds gone quiet within the same 41 minutes, and nobody, anywhere, sent so much as a single word to explain why. By the time the sun analog on perimeter 9 cycles to its dim setting, the rest of the Alliance has stopped being afraid and started being greedy. I hear it in the corridors before I hear it on the official channels. Territory talk, salvage talk, the particular cheerful tone people use when they've convinced themselves someone else's disappearance is actually very good news for them personally. I don't share the mood. I keep thinking about 10 unfinished words and a silence too clean to be panic. Marcus finds me before the morning briefing. He looks better rested than he has any right to be, like a night's sleep solved the problem instead of just delaying it. Command wants eyes on Cradle Fall, he says. Physical inspection. You've got the language clearance, and frankly nobody else wants the assignment. Because it's a ghost station. Because it's a lot of paperwork for something that's probably nothing. You said Command wants eyes on it. Command doesn't usually care about nothing. Command cares about looking thorough. There's a difference. I think about telling him that difference is exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed. But Marcus has never once in his career been persuaded by an argument he didn't want to hear. And I don't have the energy this morning to be the person who tries anyway. Instead, I ask the question that actually matters. Who else has been out there since the withdrawal? Nobody. Cradle falls outside the standard patrol radius, and nobody's had the nerve to volunteer. He pauses, and something almost like guilt crosses his face before he manages to smooth it back into professional neutrality. You'd be the first to see whatever's actually there, instead of what the reports assume is there, if you want to put it that way. I look at him for a long moment, long enough that he starts to look uncomfortable, and I think about telling him what I actually believe, which is that nothing about 41 synchronized minutes across 100 light-years is nothing. I think about telling him that people don't leave a sentence unfinished unless the thing calling them away outweighs everything, including the person they were writing to. I don't say any of it. I just nod, because someone on this station needs to go look, and it might as well be the person who already knows how to read a silence for what it's actually saying. When do I leave? I ask. 0800. Small transport skeleton crew. In and out. In and out. He says it like a promise. I already know it won't be that simple, because nothing about the last 20 hours has been simple, and because somewhere behind that clean, synchronized silence, someone made a decision I don't yet understand, and decisions like that don't stay quiet forever. They just wait for the right moment to stop being quiet. Cradlefall Station orbits a dead moon nobody bothered to name, and from a distance it looks intact, lights still burning along its outer ring, like the people inside simply stepped out for a moment. Up close, the illusion holds even longer. No hull breaches, no weapons fire scarring the plating, no sign of a fight, or a fire, or a fast and desperate escape. That is what unsettles me most. A station this size should show wear from panic, dropped equipment, doors forced open by hand when the automatic locks failed. Instead, the docking bay doors part for us on the first request, smooth and polite, like the station is still following its old routines out of habit. I bring 2 crew with me. Nadia insisted on coming, tablet in hand, ready to catalog anything that might explain what she read on that half-finished terminal message. The other is a young transport pilot named Isla Grant, quiet, competent, the kind of person who checks every corner twice before she stops checking it at all. The air inside Cradlefall is breathable, filtered, temperature-controlled. Someone left the environmental systems running on purpose. You don't do that if you're never coming back. You do that if you expect to. They didn't think this was permanent, I say, mostly to myself. Nadia doesn't look up from her scanner. Or they wanted whoever came looking to think that. We move through the outer ring first, past crew quarters left in a state that reads less like evacuation and more like a normal Tuesday interrupted. A half-eaten meal, plate still warm when we scan it, though hours have passed since the withdrawal. A jacket draped over a chair instead of packed into a bag. A child's shoe sitting by a door, small and pink, and completely wrong for a station this far from anywhere families are supposed to live. Nadia's scanner chirps behind us, sharp and unexpected in a corridor that has otherwise been silent since we boarded. We all go still. She checks the readout, exhales, shakes her head. Residual power cycling through a maintenance loop, she says. Nothing alive, nothing armed. Sorry. Don't apologize for making noise here, Isla says. I'd rather hear something than not. We keep moving, past a mess hall with chairs pushed in neatly, past a recreation room with a half-finished game still set up on a low table. Pieces frozen mid-play like the 2 people sitting across from each other simply stood up between turns and never came back to finish. I find myself cataloging these small unfinished things without meaning to. A meal, a game, a sentence. Each one a tiny fracture in the illusion that this station's emptiness was ever planned, the way an evacuation is normally planned. It doesn't feel like fear, I say, mostly to myself. What does it feel like? Isla asks. Trust. Right up until the second it wasn't there anymore. I stop at that shoe longer than I mean to. Isla notices. Families were stationed here, she says. It isn't a question. Apparently. Why would you bring a kid out to the edge of contested space? I don't have an answer for her. I file it away instead. One more piece of a pattern I can feel forming but can't yet name, the way you feel a storm building in the pressure of the air before you ever see a cloud. We find the terminal Nadia mentioned in a small common room near the school section, because of course there was a school section, because of course they built an entire life out here instead of a fortress. The screen is still active, the unfinished sentence still glowing on it exactly as she described. I tell them I'll be home before Jenner. I touch the console. Gently, like it might still be listening. Nothing happens. No hidden message unlocks. No dramatic reveal waits behind the words. It is simply an unfinished thought, left by someone who trusted they would have time to finish it later, and didn't get the chance to be right. Pull everything off this terminal, I say. Personal logs, system logs, anything with a timestamp. Nadia gets to work. Isla and I continue deeper into the station, past the administrative core, toward what the old station maps label as operations. The corridor lighting shifts as we go, cooler, more clinical. the architecture of a place built for decisions rather than living. The doors to operations are sealed, but not locked in any way that resists us for long. Behind them is a command center stripped almost completely bare. Consoles wiped clean of data. Storage drives physically removed from their housings, not stolen in a hurry, but extracted with the kind of care that suggests someone followed a checklist. One wall still holds a static display, powered by an independent cell that nobody thought to disconnect, or perhaps was left on purpose. It shows a countdown that has already reached 0, frozen there, along with a single line of standing text beneath it. Protocol Quietfall executed. All personnel accounted for. No further transmissions authorized. I read it twice. Quietfall. A name for what happened to us last night. A name that existed before it happened. Planned. Rehearsed. Filed away somewhere in a doctrine manual until the moment someone decided to use it. This wasn't a retreat, I say. This was a drill they'd already run 100 times before they ever needed it for real. Isla studies the frozen countdown. What triggers something like that? I don't know. But someone decided the trigger had been pulled, and every human station from here to the treaty line agreed with them fast enough to move in 41 minutes, without a single person arguing about it. We keep searching. In a records annex behind operations, mostly emptied but not entirely, I find a single data core someone missed, tucked behind a support strut like it slipped there by accident rather than design. I almost leave it. Something about the way it's wedged, half hidden but not fully hidden, makes me pull it out instead. Nadia meets us there 20 minutes later, out of breath, tablet clutched against her chest, like she's protecting it from something. You need to see the terminal logs, she says. Show me. She pulls up a timeline instead of raw text, because timelines are easier to understand than raw fear. 6 months before the withdrawal, human diplomatic staff attached to a joint alliance research initiative began raising formal objections to a classified project running out of a shared facility in contested space. The objections were filed, logged, and quietly buried by committee, the way objections usually are when the people raising them don't have enough votes to matter. What was the project? I ask. Above my clearance to know exactly, but the shape of it is there in the complaint filings. Something involving captured human technology, reverse engineering, not with permission. I feel something settle into place, cold and certain, the kind of understanding that arrives without any satisfaction attached to it. They found out someone was stealing from them, and lying about it to their faces. I ask her to pull the earliest complaint on record, and she does, scrolling back through months of formal language designed to sound calm, while describing something that clearly wasn't. The first filing is dated almost 7 months before the withdrawal, signed by a human liaison whose name has been redacted everywhere, except one line the redaction software missed. A single sentence, buried in a footnote, stating plainly that continued unauthorized access to protected human systems would be treated, going forward, as a breach of good faith rather than an oversight. They used that exact phrase, Nadia says, breach of good faith. Every filing after that repeats it, word for word, like someone wanted it on the record that this wasn't a misunderstanding they were willing to keep excusing. And nobody with the authority to stop it ever did. Not once. Every response in the thread is some variation of the same excuse. Ongoing review. Insufficient evidence. Scheduled for committee discussion next cycle. She scrolls further, faster now, and I watch her expression shift from professional focus into something closer to quiet anger. They gave the Alliance 7 months to fix this on their own, Claire. 7 months of formal warnings, filed exactly the way protocol requires, ignored exactly as many times as they were filed. That's my read too, Nadia says. And it looks like the complaints stopped getting filed about 6 weeks ago. Not because the problem was resolved. Because they stopped bothering to complain. Isla, quiet until now, says the thing none of us wants to say out loud. You don't warn someone before you leave a room. You only warn them if you still want something from them. If you've decided you're done wanting anything from them, you just leave. The three of us stand there in the stripped bare heart of a station built for a life humanity apparently intended to keep living, and I feel the shape of the last 20 hours reorganize itself into something far less like an accident, and far more like a decision made with total calm by people who had already run out of patience long before anyone else noticed. Before we leave, I insist on one final pass through the residential ring, not because protocol requires it, but because I need to know I looked, thoroughly, at what an entire population leaves behind when it trusts it will be coming back. Isla walks point, quiet and careful as always, while Nadia catalogs room after room into her tablet, a running inventory of a life interrupted rather than destroyed. We find a workshop near the education wing, filled with half-finished projects, small models of ships and stations built by careful hands, one of them labeled in a child's uneven handwriting, with a name I don't recognize, and a date still weeks away. A birthday, I realize, that someone was building a gift for and never got the chance to give. We find a garden, modest, self-sustaining, rows of vegetables still growing under artificial light, because nobody switched the system off on their way out the door, tended by hands that clearly expected to return and check on it again soon. They really believed this was temporary, Isla says, standing in the middle of that garden, voice quieter than I've heard it since we boarded. I think they still believe it, I say. I think temporary, to them, just means longer than anyone comfortable with the theft was hoping for. Nadia finishes her inventory in silence, and something in the careful way she closes each entry tells me she's carrying the same weight the rest of us are, the particular grief of intruding on a life you have no right to, gathering evidence from rooms that were never meant to be catalogued by strangers. We finish our sweep of Cradlefall in silence after that, cataloging what's left, sealing the data core for transport, walking past the child's shoe on our way out without either of us reaching to move it. It feels wrong to touch it. It feels like evidence of something that hasn't finished happening yet. Back aboard our transport, waiting for departure clearance, Nadia runs a preliminary analysis on the recovered data core, while Isla handles the flight checks. I sit with the two facts I can't stop turning over in my head. 41 minutes to empty 100 worlds. 6 weeks of silence before that, once the complaints stopped mattering to anyone who could have fixed the problem. 6 weeks is not a panic timeline. 6 weeks is a planning timeline. Whoever decided to trigger Protocol Quietfall didn't do it in a moment of fear. They did it after watching, patiently, to see whether anyone with the power to stop the theft actually would. Nobody did. So they left instead, quietly, without a single word of warning to the alliance that had been quietly stealing from them. And somewhere in that decision, I feel the outline of something far larger than a diplomatic dispute. Humanity didn't run because they were weak. They withdrew because staying had stopped being worth the cost of pretending everything was fine. My comm chimes before we clear the docking bay. Marcus, back on perimeter 9. Voice tight with something that isn't quite excitement and isn't quite fear. You need to see the fleet movement reports, he says. Half the alliance is already mobilizing into the vacated sectors. Trade lanes, shipyards, resource claims. They're calling it opportunity. I look out the viewport at Cradlefall shrinking behind us. Lights still burning in an empty station built for families who left everything but their footsteps behind. And I think about a doctrine with a name, rehearsed long before anyone needed to use it, and a countdown that had already reached 0 the moment we found it. Tell them to slow down, I say. Why? Because I don't think humanity left because they were finished with this space, Marcus. I think they left because they were finished asking politely. And people don't build a protocol like Quietfall unless somewhere in the plan there's also a protocol for coming back. He doesn't answer right away, and in the gap I hear other voices behind him, overlapping, excited, the particular chatter of people already dividing up something they haven't earned. Someone laughs. Someone else reads off coordinates like they're announcing a prize. Marcus, I say, who's in the room with you? Sector Logistics. They're finalizing claim boundaries for the shipyards near the old buffer line. Tell them to wait. They won't wait, Claire. Nobody's going to sit on empty shipyards out of caution when there's no evidence anyone's coming back for them. There's evidence. You're holding some of it in a stolen data core right now, sitting in my cargo hold. I can send you the footnote about the reclamation window the second I dock, and you can read it to that room yourself. He goes quiet again, and this time I let the silence sit instead of filling it, because I've learned something today about the value of silence that I didn't fully understand before I walked through Cradlefall's empty corridors. Silence isn't the absence of a message. Sometimes it's the entire message, delivered in the shape of everything that isn't being said. Send it, he says finally. I'll read it, I can't promise anyone listens. That's all I'm asking. I close the channel and sit with Isla and Nadia in the small quiet of the transport cabin, watching Cradle Fall's lights recede into the dark behind us, and I think about how strange it is that an entire station full of unfinished sentences taught me more about human intent in a single afternoon than years of monitoring their traffic ever managed to. Nadia runs a final pass over the data core, flagging sections for priority review, while Isla plots our return course with the same careful precision she checks every corner with, twice, before she trusts it enough to stop checking. You really think they're coming back? Isla says, not quite a question. I think they built an entire doctrine around the idea that leaving quietly and returning quietly are two halves of the same decision. I think somewhere in whatever command structure authorized quietfall, someone is watching exactly how the rest of us behave with the space they walked away from. And I think that observation is part of the plan too. That's a lot of trust to put in a hunch. It's not a hunch anymore, it's a pattern. And patterns don't care whether we believe in them before they finish playing out. Nadia looks up from her tablet, expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and the particular alertness that comes from spending hours staring directly at something you're afraid to fully understand. There's one more thing in the footnote I haven't mentioned yet. Go on. It references a duration, not a date, not a countdown exactly, but a range. 90 to 120 standard days between activation of quietfall and activation of the reclamation phase, assuming no resolution is reached in the interim. I do the math without needing to write it down. 90 days puts us deep into whatever territorial celebration the Alliance is currently indulging in. 120 puts us right at the edge of it, close enough that anyone still celebrating by then will have had ample time to grow comfortable, complacent, thoroughly unprepared for the moment that comfort gets interrupted. So we have a window, I say. Not to stop it, just to prepare for it. That's my read, Nadia says. Then we use it, I say. Because I don't think there's a version of this where ignorance buys anyone extra time. I think it just buys them a ruder awakening when the window finally closes. Get back to the station, he says. We'll figure out the rest from there. I don't believe him. I don't think there's a version of figuring this out that ends well for anyone currently celebrating an empty stretch of stars they didn't earn and don't understand. But I close the channel anyway, because there's nothing else useful to say from a transport shuttle, with a stolen data core in the hold, and an unfinished sentence still glowing somewhere behind me, in a station full of empty rooms. Whatever comes next, it will not announce itself first. I already know that much. Humanity taught me that lesson in 41 silent minutes, and I have a feeling they aren't finished teaching it. 3 months pass, and the galaxy forgets how to be careful. I watch it happen from Perimeter 9, a front row seat to a kind of hunger I didn't know the Alliance had been holding back for so long. The vacated human sectors fill up fast, first with scouting fleets, then with salvage crews, then with full colonial administrations moving in behind them, like the tide following the first curious wave onto the sand. Shipyards humanity spent a generation building change hands within weeks. Trade lanes stabilized through decades of careful human diplomacy get carved up between factions who never once helped build them. Marcus calls it progress. He uses that word so often in briefings that I've started counting how many times a session before I stop listening to the rest of what he says. There's a celebration held on Perimeter 9 at the end of the second month, organized by Sector Logistics to mark the formal transfer of 3 shipyards into Alliance administration. I attend because Marcus asks me to, personally, in the careful tone of a man trying to smooth over a disagreement without admitting there was ever a disagreement to smooth over. The observation lounge is strung with lights borrowed from cargo storage, and someone has printed a banner declaring the sector officially expanded, as if expansion were a simple thing, as if territory could be claimed the way you claim an empty seat on a transport. I stand near the back with a drink I don't finish, watching people I've worked alongside for years laugh and toast and trade predictions about how much further the claimed boundary might eventually stretch. Owen finds me there, less certain of himself than he was the night the ships disappeared, like some of his easy confidence got left behind on that first shift and never quite made its way back. You're not celebrating, he says. I don't have anything to celebrate yet. Yet? Ask me again in 90 days. He doesn't understand the reference, and I don't explain it. because explaining it would mean admitting how much time I've spent since Cradlefall counting down a window nobody else in this room has any reason to believe exists. Instead, I watch the banner sway gently in the station's recycled air, expanded, and I think about how confidently people can misname a thing when they've decided in advance what they want it to mean. Nadia and I keep working the data core from Cradlefall in whatever hours Command doesn't notice we're spending on it. The picture it paints doesn't get more comfortable the deeper we go. Protocol Quietfall wasn't improvised. It was a doctrine humanity built decades ago, tested in simulations, refined, filed away, and never once activated until 6 weeks of ignored complaints convinced someone with the authority to pull the trigger that pulling it was the only dignified option left. There's a second phase, Nadia tells me one evening, tablet balanced on her knees in the cramped analysis bay we've claimed as our own, referenced in a footnote, not detailed. Quietfall isn't just a withdrawal protocol, it's the first half of something bigger. Does it name the second half? Not by name, but there's a term that repeats across several documents. Reclamation window. I don't like the sound of that phrase, mostly because I don't need to understand its technical meaning to understand its intent. You don't call something a reclamation window unless you're planning to reclaim something, and you don't build that plan into the same doctrine as a silent withdrawal unless the two are meant to work together, one leading into the other on a timeline nobody outside humanity was ever meant to see coming. I bring this to Marcus. He listens the way men like Marcus listen, when they've already decided the conclusion doesn't matter to them, nodding at the right intervals, eyes drifting toward the star chart, where his precious new territorial claims sit marked in his favorite shade of victorious blue. Even if you're right, he says, what would you have me do? Command isn't going to abandon claimed territory because a junior signal officer found a scary word in a stolen file. It's not a scary word, Marcus. It's a plan. Every doctrine is a plan. That doesn't mean it survives contact with reality. Humanity's gone. Whatever grudge they were carrying, they took it with them. I want to believe he might be right. Some nights I try, lying awake in my quarters listening to the low hum of a station that used to feel safe, simply because it was busy, familiar, mine. But then I remember the unfinished sentence on that terminal. 10 words a person chose not to finish, because whatever called them away mattered more. And I understand that grudges like that don't simply evaporate because the people carrying them stopped talking about it. Strange things start happening in the claimed sectors, not long after that conversation. Small at first, easy to dismiss individually, harder to dismiss once they start forming a pattern of their own. A salvage crew working an abandoned human shipyard reports equipment that shouldn't still be powered, somehow drawing energy from a source they can't locate. A colonial administration moving into a former human agricultural station finds every seed bank perfectly preserved, cataloged, and locked behind an encryption none of their best engineers can crack. A scouting vessel exploring the outer edge of the old buffer zone picks up a transmission, 3 seconds long, in a language their translation systems can't parse, before it cuts off and never repeats. None of it is sabotage exactly. Nothing explodes, nothing gets destroyed. It reads instead like humanity left behind, not a minefield, but a series of locked doors, each one a small reminder that they built this place. They understood it completely, and everyone currently walking through it does not. I start keeping my own log of the incidents, separate from the official reports, because the official reports have a way of smoothing strangeness into something more comfortable by the time it reaches command. A colonial administrator on a former human agricultural world reports that every irrigation system on the planet switched to a conservation cycle on the same day, without any local override command issued, as though the systems themselves had been told, quietly, to start preparing for someone's absence to end. A trade convoy passing through a reclaimed corridor reports their navigation systems briefly displaying an old human designation for the route instead of the Alliance's newly assigned one, correcting itself within seconds, too fast to screenshot, too consistent across 3 separate ships to dismiss as malfunction. None of it frightens anyone enough to change behavior. That's the part I find hardest to sit with, watching people read these reports and shrug them off as curiosities, footnotes, the kind of thing you mention once at a briefing and then forget by the following week because nothing exploded and nobody got hurt. I start to understand, watching that shrug repeated across dozens of separate incidents, that this is exactly the kind of complacency Nadia's footnote was counting on. Not fear. Forgetting. I raise it with Marcus twice more, before Isla's report finally lands hard enough to matter, and both times he tells me, not unkindly, that a station can't run on my instincts alone, that command needs pattern, precedent, something more solid than a signal officer's growing sense of dread. I understand the position he's in. I don't think understanding it makes it any easier to watch 100 small warnings pile up unheeded, while the calendar keeps moving steadily toward a number only 2 people on this station are actually counting toward. Isla, who's been quietly assigned to a rotating patrol covering the newly claimed trade lanes, brings me the account that finally convinces even Marcus to start paying attention. "We intercepted a courier drone," she says, meeting me and Nadia in our usual bay, voice lower than usual, the careful tone she uses when she's decided something actually matters. Not alliance make, not anything currently in our registry. It didn't attack, didn't evade, just sat there transmitting on a tight beam toward the old treaty line before our escort disabled it. Transmitting what? We couldn't decrypt the payload, but the drone's chassis had a marking on it, a single word, stenciled where a serial number should be. "What word?" She hesitates, the way people hesitate before saying something they know will sound dramatic, no matter how carefully they phrase it. "Soon." The bay goes quiet after that in a way that has nothing to do with the equipment humming around us. I think about a doctrine with 2 halves, one already executed with total precision, the other still referenced only in a footnote nobody outside humanity was meant to read. I think about a countdown that reached 0 the moment protocol quietfall triggered, and I wonder, not for the first time, whether that countdown was ever meant to stop there, or whether it simply reset itself the instant the withdrawal completed, quietly ticking toward whatever reclamation window meant in practice. I spend those 2 days preparing in the only way I know how, pulling every scrap of the Cradlefall data core into a single coherent timeline, cross-referencing it against the incidents Isla and I have both been quietly tracking, building something I can actually put in front of a room full of people who have spent 3 months deciding my caution was somebody else's problem to worry about. Nadia helps where she can, though her own workload has doubled since word started spreading informally about what we found on that dead station. I keep thinking about the 7 months, she tells me, late on the second night, both of us running on the kind of exhaustion that makes honesty easier than usual. 7 months of formal warnings. That's not a species reacting in anger. That's a species that gave everyone every reasonable chance to fix this, before deciding fixing it themselves was the only option left. That's what scares me most about the briefing, I admit. Not that I might be wrong, that I might be right, and nobody in that room is going to want to hear how much of this was avoidable. Would it have changed anything if someone had listened 7 months ago? I think about that longer than I mean to, watching the timeline scroll past on my own tablet, complaint after complaint, warning after warning, each one filed with the same patient, formal language, each one ignored with the same casual indifference. I don't know, I finally say. But I think humanity decided somewhere along the way that they weren't willing to find out the hard way whether patience would ever actually be rewarded. I think that's the whole lesson buried in Quietfall. Not cruelty, just the end of a very long, very reasonable wait. Marcus finally calls a full briefing 2 days later, after 3 more incidents get reported across the claimed sectors, all bearing the same quiet, deliberate signature. No violence, no warnings beyond that single word, delivered without explanation, exactly the way everything humanity does seems to arrive without explanation. Command wants an assessment, he tells the room, and for the first time since I've known him, he sounds less like a man chasing credit and more like a man beginning to understand the size of the mistake everyone around him has been celebrating. "Doyle, you've spent months on this. Give us something useful." I stand, and for a moment I consider softening what I'm about to say, the way I've softened uncomfortable truths for men like Marcus before. Then I think about the child's shoe by that door on Cradlefall Station, small and pink, and left behind by a family that trusted they'd have time to come back for it. Humanity didn't leave because they were afraid, I say. They left because staying had stopped being worth the dishonesty they were being fed. That's not weakness. That's patience running out. Everything we've seen since the withdrawal, the preserved shipyards, the locked seed banks, the drone carrying a single word instead of a threat, none of it reads like abandonment. It reads like a species that packed up carefully, on their own schedule, because they always intended to come back and settle the account on their own terms. And the word on the drone? Someone asks from the back of the room. I think it means exactly what it says. I think we've been standing in someone else's house, admiring the furniture, while the owners finish whatever business kept them away. And I think that business is almost finished. Nobody in the room argues with me this time. Nobody offers the comfortable alternative explanation Marcus reached for 3 months ago. Instead, the silence stretches out, heavy, honest, for the first time since this whole crisis began. Everyone in that room finally sitting with the same cold certainty I've been carrying alone since I stood in front of an unfinished sentence on a dead station's terminal. Marcus breaks the quiet eventually, voice smaller than I've ever heard it. What do we do? I don't have a clean answer for him, not one that fits neatly into a briefing summary. But I have a feeling, sitting low and certain in my chest, that whatever comes through the treaty line when reclamation window finally activates will not wait for anyone's permission to arrive, and it will not care how comfortable the Alliance has gotten in the space they claimed, while humanity was busy being patient somewhere else. We stop celebrating, I say, and we start paying attention, because I don't think we get a warning shot before this. I think the warning already happened. Months ago, in 41 silent minutes, nobody bothered to take seriously. That night I sit alone in the observation lounge again, watching the star chart the way I did the first night this all began, and I notice something I missed before, in all the noise of territorial celebration. The gaps left by humanity's withdrawal, once clean-edged and empty, have started filling in with new markers, new claims, new administrative boundaries drawn by people who never once asked whether the space they were claiming had already been promised to someone else's return. Somewhere out past the treaty line, in silence just as total and just as deliberate as the one that emptied these sectors in the first place, I know something is gathering. I don't know its shape yet. I don't know how many ships, how much force, how far the reclamation window is designed to reach, but I know it's coming the same way everything human comes, without a broadcast, without a threat, without so much as a single word of warning beyond the one already delivered. Soon. I write the word down on a scrap of paper and pin it above my console, not as a decoration, but as a reminder, because I have a feeling that when it finally happens, it will happen fast, and I intend to be one of the few people on this station who isn't caught entirely by surprise. It happens on an ordinary shift, the way the first silence happened on an ordinary shift, and I think that is the part nobody ever prepares for, not the scale of it, the timing, the way catastrophe prefers a Tuesday to a moment you've braced yourself for. I am at my console when every sensor array covering the old buffer zone lights up at once, not with alarm signatures, not with the ragged, chaotic bloom of an unplanned attack, but with something far more unsettling in its precision. Contacts appear in formation, hundreds of them, arranged with the kind of geometric certainty that tells you immediately these positions were calculated long before anyone gave the order to occupy them. No hailing frequency opens, no ultimatum broadcasts across the claimed sectors demanding surrender or explaining terms. The ships simply arrive, exactly where they mean to be, and begin. I watch it unfold across a dozen linked displays, because Marcus finally authorized full sensor sharing across the sector 3 weeks ago, after the fourth incident convinced even him that pretending everything was fine had stopped being a viable strategy. What I see doesn't look like war the way the training simulations taught me to recognize war. There's no wasted motion in it, no desperation, no chaos of fear driving decisions. It looks like a demolition crew walking through a condemned building, methodical, unbothered, taking apart exactly what needs to come down, and leaving everything else standing. Shipyards claimed 3 months ago go dark within minutes, their new occupants evacuated by escort vessels that arrive with an almost courteous efficiency, herding rather than destroying, giving people time to leave before the facilities themselves get reclaimed or dismantled. Trade lane checkpoints, established by alliance administrations who never once asked whether they'd been promised to someone else, simply stop existing as claimed territory. Their garrisons offered exactly one broadcast, brief and without embellishment, informing them that the space they occupy has been reclaimed and they have a defined window to withdraw before that reclamation becomes absolute. Nadia patches through a wider feed pulled from the Alliance's own shared sensor network, still open to us in the confusion, giving me a view of the reclamation stretching far beyond our own small corner of it. Across 3 sectors, the pattern repeats with a consistency that would be almost beautiful if it weren't so unsettling. Formation after formation arrives exactly where projected, executes exactly the same calm, unhurried procedure, and moves on to the next claimed position, without pause, without visible strain, without a single deviation from whatever plan has clearly been rehearsed to the point of instinct. I watch one feed longer than the others, a reclaimed research outpost near the old buffer line, the same kind of facility Nadia's footnote once hinted had triggered all of this in the first place. The escort vessel handling that reclamation doesn't simply secure the station. It waits, patient, while a small team boards manually, and I watch on grainy secondary footage as they carry out sealed containers, one after another, with the exact same care I imagine someone might use handling something that was stolen from them, and finally, quietly, being returned to where it belongs. They're not just taking territory back, I say, mostly to myself, though Nadia hears it anyway. No, she agrees. They're taking back whatever was stolen from them in the first place. The territory's just the wrapping. Isla calms me from her patrol wing, voice tight, controlled, the sound of someone holding steady through something that would break a less careful person. Claire, I've got 6 of them on my scope. They're not engaging. They're just herding us toward the corridor exit like we're livestock. Take the corridor, I say. Don't test them. I wasn't planning to. Nadia arrives at my station with her tablet, already streaming intercepted fragments, most of them administrative rather than tactical. Evacuation instructions delivered in perfectly clear Alliance standard. No threats attached. No demands beyond the single one that matters. Leave the space that was never yours to keep. They're not trying to conquer anything, Nadia says, and there's something like awe underneath the fear in her voice. They're trying to undo 3 months of theft, as fast and as cleanly as possible. Marcus arrives on the deck moments later, and for the first time since I've known him, he looks like a man who has run out of confident things to say. He watches the display in silence, watches shipyard after shipyard, checkpoint after checkpoint, colonial claim after colonial claim, fold back into human control, with a speed that makes our earlier 3 months of celebration look like a child's sandcastle meeting an incoming tide. How long, he asks eventually, before it reaches us? I check the projected advance. Perimeter 9 sits close enough to the old buffer zone that our own hasty territorial claims, the ones Marcus was so proud of 3 months ago, fall well within the reclamation pattern already unfolding across the sector. Not long, I say. Minutes, maybe. Depends how fast they're moving through the corridor ahead of us. He doesn't argue with me this time. He doesn't reach for the comfortable explanation, the political retreat theory, the idea that this is somehow less significant than it looks. He simply nods, and for once in 3 months, actually listens when I tell him what to do next. Get every non-essential crew to the evacuation bay, I say. If this follows the same pattern as everywhere else, they'll give us a window before it becomes absolute. But I don't think that window will be generous, and I don't think it'll come with a second warning. He moves. For the first time since this crisis began, Marcus Bell actually moves like a man who understands the size of what's coming. And something in me, some small stubborn part that spent 3 months being ignored, feels a grim satisfaction in watching him finally catch up to where I've been standing since cradlefall. The broadcast reaches us 11 minutes later, delivered in the same flat, unembellished tone every other sector reported. No threats, no demands beyond the one condition. A voice, human, calm in a way that unsettles me more than shouting ever could, informing Perimeter 9 that the station sits within reclaimed jurisdiction and offering a defined window for evacuation before that jurisdiction becomes absolute. I recognize something in that calm. It's the same calm as an unfinished sentence on a dead terminal, the same calm as a countdown that had already reached 0 before anyone found it. Whoever is speaking on that broadcast isn't angry. They aren't gloating. They are simply finishing something they decided, months ago, needed finishing. Nadia looks at me across the console, tablet forgotten in her hands. What do we do? We evacuate, I say, because I don't think there's a version of staying that ends well for anyone who ignores that voice. We move through the corridors toward the evacuation bay, alongside 200 other station personnel, And I notice something in the crowd that surprises me even now. After everything, nobody panics. Nobody screams or shoves or claws toward the transports out of raw animal fear. Instead, there's a strange, subdued discipline to the evacuation, as if some part of every person on this station already understood, somewhere beneath their earlier celebration, that this moment was always going to come, and the only real choice left was how gracefully they met it. Near the evacuation bay, I pass the observation lounge where the celebration banner still hangs, forgotten in the rush, its cheerful lettering announcing an expansion that has already stopped being true. Someone has knocked over one of the borrowed cargo lights in the crush of people moving past, and it lies on its side, still lit, throwing a long crooked shadow across the word sector until only the middle letters remain visible in the light. I don't stop to fix it. There isn't time, and some part of me suspects it wouldn't matter anyway, that the banner was already a kind of lie the moment it went up, decorating a claim that was never as settled as the people under it wanted to believe. Marcus catches up with me at the boarding ramp, breathing hard, tunic buttoned correctly this time, the small detail somehow more unsettling than anything else about the last hour. He doesn't say anything clever. He doesn't try to reclaim the confidence he spent 3 months performing. He just falls into step beside me, quiet, and for the length of the walk down that ramp, I let him. I should have listened sooner, he says, once we're strapped in and the shuttle starts its departure sequence. You listened when it mattered. That's generous. It's accurate. There's a difference. I almost smile at my own words, hearing an echo of the very first thing I said to him 3 months ago, in a corridor that feels impossibly far away now. You moved people the second you understood the size of it. That's more than a lot of command staff managed today. He doesn't answer, but something in his shoulders loosens slightly, the particular relief of a man who expected to be blamed and was handed something closer to grace instead. I take one of the last shuttles out, watching Perimeter 9 shrink behind us through the viewport, the same way Cradlefall Station once shrank behind me 3 months ago. Except this time I understand exactly what's happening, instead of only fearing it. Human vessels move through the space we're vacating with an economy of motion that still takes my breath away. Not out of terror this time, but out of something closer to reluctant admiration. They aren't destroying the station, they're simply securing it, methodically, the same demolition crew calm I watched them apply to every shipyard and checkpoint and colonial claim across the sector. A single vessel breaks formation and moves close enough to our shuttle that I can see it clearly through the viewport, sleek, unmarked by the kind of aggressive weaponry I expected, built instead with the quiet confidence of something that has never needed to prove its capability through display. A voice opens a channel to our shuttle, brief, without any of the coldness I braced myself for. This is Commander Elena Marsh, Reclamation Escort. You're clear to proceed to the designated holding zone. Nobody on this vessel intends you harm. We just need the space back. I sit with that for a long moment after the channel closes, watching her vessel escort our shuttle toward a rendezvous point, with a patience that feels almost gentle, given everything I now understand about the doctrine that brought her here. Somewhere behind that calm voice sits a species that left without a word, watched in silence while their trust was violated, and returned without a word either, taking back exactly what was theirs, and asking for nothing more than that. The holding zone itself grows crowded within the hour, dozens of evacuated shuttles gathering at a safe distance from the reclamation, their occupants pressed against viewports the way people press against windows during a storm they can't look away from. Nobody around me talks much. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a crowd once fear stops being useful, and understanding starts taking its place instead, and I feel that quiet settle over the holding zone the same way it settled over Cradlefall's corridors months ago. A secondary broadcast reaches every shuttle in the holding zone not long after we arrive, the same calm voice pattern, different speaker, delivering an update rather than a warning this time. Reclamation of Perimeter 9 and surrounding trade corridors complete. Evacuated personnel cleared for return to Alliance-designated territory beyond the new boundary. No further action required. No further action required. I turn the phrase over in my head, struck by how ordinary it sounds for something that just quietly rewrote the shape of an entire sector in under 2 hours. Somewhere behind that broadcast sits a species that clearly planned every second of this, down to the exact wording used to close it out, calm and administrative, as if reclaiming 100 worlds were simply another task, completed on schedule, rather than the culmination of 7 months of patience finally running dry. Isla's shuttle links up with ours at the holding zone 20 minutes later, and I find her in the observation section, watching the same reclamation unfold across the wider sector that I've been watching since it began. "They're not even angry," she says, sounding almost unsettled by the fact. "I don't think anger was ever the point," I say. "I think they decided a long time ago that anger wastes time. You could spend fixing the actual problem instead." We watch together as the last of the Alliance claims fold back into human territory, sector by sector, checkpoint by checkpoint, until the star chart that once showed 100 worlds of clean, human-shaped emptiness now shows those same worlds, filled back in with the quiet, deliberate presence of a species that never once needed to explain itself to anyone else in order to take back what belonged to it. I think about the 10 unfinished words on that terminal in Cradle Fall Station, and I wonder, not for the first time, whether the person who wrote them ever got the chance to finish that sentence after all, whether somewhere in this vast, silent reclamation, a family found their way back to a small pink shoe left waiting by a door. I hope they did. I think, given everything I've learned about how humanity does things, that they probably did. 6 weeks after the reclamation, I stand on the observation deck of a new listening post, smaller than Perimeter 9, built at the edge of what is now, unmistakably, marked as human space on every updated star chart in the sector. Command reassigned me here after the dust settled, partly because of my work on Cradlefall, mostly, I suspect, because nobody quite knew what else to do with a signal officer who predicted the second half of a doctrine nobody else took seriously until it was already unfolding above their heads. The Alliance held hearings after the reclamation, formal ones, full of careful language about miscommunication and unfortunate escalation, as if what happened could be filed neatly under some bureaucratic heading and forgotten within a fiscal cycle. I read the transcripts once, then never again. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from watching powerful people describe a species walking away in total silence and returning with total precision as a mere miscommunication, when everyone who actually lived through those 41 minutes, and the reclamation that followed, knows better. What changes most, in the months that follow, isn't policy. Policy always changes slowly, weighed down by the same committees that spent 7 months ignoring formal warnings before any of this began. What changes is smaller and harder to legislate, a shift in the way people across the Alliance talk about humanity now, quieter, more careful, stripped of the easy confidence that used to color every conversation about their absence and their eventual, inevitable return. I notice it first in the language of the incident reports still filtering through my new post. Where officers once wrote about human behavior with a kind of detached curiosity, cataloging it the way you'd catalog an interesting but ultimately harmless variable, the newer reports read differently, more attentive, written by people who have learned, the hard way, that overlooking a pattern in human conduct carries a cost nobody wants to pay twice. I read one report from a Border Patrol officer describing a routine human escort vessel's approach as textbook and courteous, and I find myself smiling at the word choice, because I remember when courteous would have sounded like the wrong word entirely for something that arrives without any warning and takes back exactly what it came for. The Alliance builds an entire new office in the months following the reclamation, dedicated exclusively to human relations, staffed by analysts pulled from a dozen different departments, all of them scrambling to catch up on decades of behavior they spent too long dismissing as simply reserved. I get invited to consult twice, brought in as the person who apparently understood the shape of Quietfall before anyone else took it seriously. And both times, I find myself explaining the same basic idea to rooms full of people who nod along, like it's revelation, rather than the plain, quiet fact it always was. Humanity does not perform its intentions for an audience. It simply carries them out and lets the results explain everything that needs explaining. Marcus retired not long after the hearings concluded. I don't think it was entirely his choice, though nobody phrased it that way in the official notice. I saw him once at a transfer station before I shipped out to my new post, and he looked like a man who had spent 3 months building a house on land he never actually owned, only to watch it fold quietly back into someone else's hands, without so much as an argument to hold on to afterward. He didn't say much to me. I don't think there was much left for him to say. Nadia stayed in analysis, promoted now, running a much larger team tasked specifically with understanding human doctrine, human patience, human decisions, a field of study that didn't formally exist 6 months ago, and now consumes entire departments across the Alliance. She calms me sometimes, sharing fragments of what her team uncovers, careful details about a species that apparently built an entire philosophy around the idea that actions carry more weight than announcements ever could. Isla transferred to escort duty along the new treaty line, the one drawn not by committee negotiation this time, but by humanity itself, quietly, without a single round of diplomatic argument, simply presented as fact to an alliance too exhausted and too humbled to challenge it. She tells me the human patrols along that line are unfailingly polite, professional, almost gentle in their interactions. The same unsettling calm I remember from Commander Marsh's voice on that shuttle channel months ago. I think about that calm often, sitting here at my new console, watching a star chart that finally makes sense to me in a way it never did before Cradlefall. Humanity didn't leave because they lacked the strength to stay and fight. They left because staying and fighting would have meant lowering themselves to a level of noise and threat that apparently isn't how they choose to operate. They decided, calmly, that silence was a more honest response to betrayal than an argument nobody around them was interested in having fairly. And when the silence had made its point, they returned just as calmly, and took back exactly what was theirs, without cruelty, without excess, without a single unnecessary word. I request a transfer route that takes me past Cradlefall itself, 4 months after the reclamation, using a small window of leave time I've been saving without quite admitting to myself what I intended to spend it on. The station looks different from a distance now, still orbiting the same nameless dead moon, but the lights along its outer ring burn steadier than I remember. Warmer somehow, the way a home looks different from a place someone merely used to occupy. I don't request docking clearance. I don't think I have any right to walk those corridors again. Not after everything. Not as a guest this time, instead of an investigator picking through the evidence of someone else's grief. I simply hold position at a respectful distance and watch through the viewport, close enough to see small shapes moving along the outer ring, people, families, going about the unremarkable business of living somewhere they clearly always intended to come back to. A single vessel breaks from a nearby patrol pattern and approaches my shuttle, unhurried, and I recognize the calm precision of its movement before the channel even opens. The voice that greets me isn't Commander Marsh this time, younger, careful, still carrying that same unmistakable steadiness underneath it. "You're outside the standard visitor corridor," the voice says. "Can I ask your business here?" I hesitate, unsure how to explain 4 months of carrying a small pink shoe around in my memory, without sounding like I'm asking for something I have no right to ask for. "I was here before," I say instead. "During the withdrawal, I helped catalog what was left behind. I just wanted to see it standing again." A pause, long enough that I brace myself for a polite dismissal. Then, unexpectedly, something closer to warmth. "Appreciated. Most people who come looking after the fact are here for salvage rights or an apology. Neither of us has time for. You're welcome to hold position as long as you need. Just don't cross the inner marker." I won't. I sit there for the better part of an hour, watching lights move along a ring of windows that used to be still and dark and full of unfinished things, and something in my chest finally settles that has been unsettled since the night 412 signatures blinked from green to nothing. It isn't relief exactly. It's closer to permission, the quiet kind nobody has to grant out loud, to finally stop carrying a stranger's unfinished sentence, like it was mine to finish for them. I requested and received clearance, eventually, to send a message through the new diplomatic channel established along the treaty line, addressed to no one in particular, filed under the same designation the Alliance now uses for all official inquiries into the events of Protocol Quietfall and its reclamation phase. I wrote it carefully, more carefully than any report I'd filed in my career, because some part of me needed humanity to know that at least one person on the other side of that silence had actually been paying attention. I wrote that I found the shoe. I wrote that I hoped whoever left it behind found their way back to the door it was waiting beside. I wrote that I finally understood the difference between running and leaving, and that I was sorry it took an entire alliance forgetting how to be careful before anyone bothered to notice the difference mattered. My days at the new post settle into a rhythm I didn't expect to find comforting, watching a border drawn not through negotiation, but through quiet, Absolute demonstration, tracking human traffic that moves through it now, with the same unhurried confidence I first mistook for coldness, back on that shuttle beside Commander Marsh's escort vessel. I've stopped mistaking it for coldness. I understand now that it's simply the sound of a species that no longer feels the need to perform reassurance for anyone watching, because its actions have already done all the reassuring that matters. I think, some nights, about how close the Alliance came to learning this lesson, at a cost far higher than an embarrassing round of hearings and a quietly redrawn map. Humanity's reclamation could have looked entirely different. I saw enough in those 2 hours to understand that the calm, careful precision wasn't the only option available to them, only the one they chose, deliberately, because cruelty apparently isn't a currency they consider worth spending, even when they'd have every justification to spend it. I never expected a reply. Doctrines like quietfall don't strike me as the kind of thing built by people who spend much time explaining themselves after the fact, and I'd made peace with that before I ever sent the message. A reply came anyway, 3 days later, brief, unsigned except for a single line beneath the message body that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of species I'd spent 6 months trying to understand. Sentence finished. Thank you for reading it carefully enough to ask. I sit with that message longer than I probably should, watching the quiet hum of a listening post built along a border humanity drew, without asking anyone's permission, and I think about how strange it is that the loudest lesson I've ever learned came wrapped entirely in silence. There's a word in 6 of the languages I've cataloged across my career for a threat that announces itself before it arrives. Loud, performative, designed to be feared before it's ever actually felt. There isn't a word in any of them, human included, for what I watched happen instead. A species that decided quietly, once, that trust had been broken beyond the point where words could repair it, and then simply acted on that decision, without ever raising its voice to justify the choice to anyone standing in its way. I still catalog frequencies for a living. Human frequencies, mostly, calm now, steady, predictable in the particular way that only comes from a species no longer needing to prove anything to the people watching them. I used to find that predictability boring, back before Cradlefall, back before I understood what silence like that could actually mean, if you let yourself listen closely enough. I don't find it boring anymore. I find it, more than anything else I've learned in this career, quietly, permanently reassuring, because I finally understand the shape of the promise buried inside it. Humanity doesn't warn. Humanity doesn't announce. Humanity simply decides, and acts, and lets the results speak for themselves in a silence loud enough to change the shape of an entire galaxy, without a single word ever needing to be raised. And somewhere out past the new treaty line, in a station rebuilt exactly as it was before, I imagine a small pink shoe sitting by a door again, no longer waiting, because the sentence it was left behind for finally got the chance to finish.